It was supposed to be just a night out. Nothing fancy, nothing wild, just 5 friends, 5 young black men with dreams bigger than their bank accounts, celebrating a birthday in the city they called home. October 15th, 2005, a Saturday night that had started like so many others in Montgomery, Alabama. But for Malik, Jalen, Tyrese, Dre, and Elijah, it would be the last time anyone would ever see them alive. Elijah Moore had just turned 20. The youngest of the group, he was the baby brother, the one everyone looked out for, the one who still believed that good grades and hard work would get you somewhere. He wanted to be a civil engineer, to build schools in neighborhoods that had been forgotten. That night was his. The others, Malik Carter, the responsible one, studying mechanical engineering, Jalen Brooks, always joking, always loud, a business major with dreams of running his family's auto shop, Tyrese Daniels, the quiet coder with a laptop always in his bag, and Dre Johnson, the artist turned architect, who saw beauty in brick walls and broken windows. They were his brothers, not by blood, but by something deeper. They had met at Alabama State during freshman orientation, bonded over being the only black faces in certain classes, over being told they spoke so well, over side glances in the grocery store when they stood together too long. They'd stuck together through midterms, broken hearts, bad cafeteria food, and nights when they had to choose between gas money and groceries. That Saturday, they met up at Jalen's house in the West Side. His mom made them fried chicken, cornbread, and lemonade, just in case they didn't eat later. They laughed through the entire meal. Dre brought a hand-drawn caricature of Elijah holding a blueprint and wearing a crown. Our future king of infrastructure, he called him. Tyrese had a disposable camera he'd bought from a dollar store, joking that he was bringing it back old school. They planned a simple night, dinner at Mama Lou's, a local soul food spot downtown, then a few drinks at The Hollow, a bar that didn't check IDs too hard and played old-school R&B on weekends. After that, maybe drive up to Hollow Ridge, a scenic overlook known for its nighttime view of the city. Romantic for couples, but also perfect for group selfies and vibing to music with the car doors open. They were all smiles when they left Mama Lou's. A waitress later said she remembered them. The 5 black boys with good manners and big laughs. They tipped her $20 on a $60 tab. At the bar, they stayed for less than 2 hours. No fights. No drama. Just jokes, drinks, and planning their futures like the world would wait for them. They left around 11:30 p.m., Elijah still holding his caricature, Tyrese pocketing the camera, and Malik behind the wheel of his old silver Honda Civic. They asked the bartender how to get to Hollow Ridge, and he gave them directions like he'd done a dozen times before. It should have been just a short drive, but they never came back. The next morning, Jalen's mom woke to find his bed untouched. Malik's father stood outside, waiting for the car his son had promised to return by dawn. Tyrese's sister, who he texted every night, sat with her phone, confused. Elijah's mother called his phone 3 times before it went straight to voicemail. No one panicked, not yet. Maybe they crashed at someone's place, maybe the car broke down, maybe they'd be back by noon. But by evening, reality began to set in. 5 black students, all missing. No calls, no texts, no sign. And suddenly, the world, the system they thought might protect them, didn't move. Police shrugged. Boys disappear all the time, one officer reportedly said. They'll show up. When the families insisted, the words came sharper. Maybe they ran off. Young black men, you know how it is. Maybe they're in trouble. Not missing. Not taken. Just another case to file under. Probably gone. But these were not boys who ran. These were sons with mothers who knew their patterns, fathers who knew their voices, siblings who knew their fears. These were students who left behind wallets, books, dreams still unfinished. And they weren't just missing, they were being ignored. What happened that night on Hollow Ridge? What did they see? Who saw them? Why was their disappearance so easy to dismiss until it wasn't? 8 years would pass before the world remembered their names, before the trees of Talladega whispered what they'd hidden, before 5 families would trade hope for horror. But that night, none of that had happened yet. That night, there were just 5 young men laughing down a dark road, unaware they were driving straight into silence. And from that silence, a mystery would grow, not just about what happened, but about why no one cared soon enough to stop it. The Monday after their disappearance, the air in Montgomery was humid and unmoving, but inside 5 different homes, something colder than weather had set in. Grief hadn't arrived yet, not fully, because there was still a sliver of hope. Still a chance that maybe it was all just a misunderstanding. Maybe the boys had stayed out too late. Maybe they were recovering from a wild night. Maybe they'd roll up laughing about how worried everyone was. But minute by minute, that hope cracked. By noon, it collapsed. Malik's father, a veteran who had spent his life believing in systems, was the first to walk into the Montgomery Police Department with a photo of his son and the words, "He didn't come home." A young officer barely glanced at it. "How old is he?" 22. "He's grown. Give it a day or two. Maybe he's laying low." "Laying low from what?" Malik's father snapped. No answer. Elijah's mother showed up next, clutching her son's favorite hoodie and his college ID. Her voice was trembling. "He just turned 20. He never misses Sunday church. Something's wrong." The officer nodded with empty eyes, took her information, and added it to a stack already forgotten. Within hours, all 5 families had filed reports, but no Amber Alert, no press conference, no helicopters or search parties, no urgency, only murmurs. Behind closed doors, the whispers were venomous. They probably did something, drugs, gang stuff. Maybe they owed someone, black kids in a Honda Civic disappearing after midnight. That's not exactly rare, is it? The implication didn't need to be said aloud, that their skin color was already a verdict. By Tuesday, the families realized no cavalry was coming. Jalen's sister, a paralegal, started printing flyers. Dre's cousin, a social media assistant, created a MySpace page titled, "Where Are They?" It featured 5 smiling faces beneath bold letters. Missing since October 15th. No media coverage yet. Imani Fields, a fellow student and friend of Elijah's from class, picked up the cause like a torch. She didn't have money, but she had conviction and a webcam. That night, she uploaded a video. If 5 white college students disappeared after a birthday party, would the police still be waiting to see? Would there still be silence? Would they even allow silence? Her voice cracked at the end, but she didn't look away from the lens. "Say their names: Elijah, Malik, Tyrese, Jalen, Dre. They mattered. They matter." The videos spread fast, but not fast enough. Local news outlets picked up the story only after the flyers flooded downtown. Reporters called it peculiar, but added caveats. Authorities believe the men may have left voluntarily. No evidence, just bias. No investigation, just speculation. Meanwhile, the families mobilized. They traced the boys' steps, the restaurant, the bar, the gas station. The owner of Mama Lou's remembered them. "Polite boys tipped me $20. They were happy." A bartender at the Hollow recalled them asking about Hollow Ridge. "Told them how to get there, never thought twice." The clerk at the gas station, an older white man, hesitated. "Yeah, I saw them. Around 11:45 they got gas. All of them were laughing, playing music." But when pressed about which direction they drove, he gave conflicting details. "East. No, west maybe. Not sure. Lot of cars come through." The police refused to escalate the case. When pressed during a community meeting, the department spokesperson said, "There's no evidence of foul play, no abandoned vehicle, no bodies. They're adults. They can choose to disappear." Those words cut like a blade. They can choose to disappear. But disappear into where? Into 60,000 acres of forest and silence, into the fog of assumption and racial stereotypes, or into the abyss that swallows every black missing person case when urgency is reserved only for others. Behind closed doors, the families wept. In public, they marched. They stood outside the police station with posters. They went on radio shows. begged pastors to speak their sons' names from the pulpit. Still the momentum faded. New scandals hit the news cycle. Montgomery moved on. Weeks passed, then months. And in time, even hope became heavy. It aged them. It wore into their bones. Malik's father stopped shaving. Elijah's mother stopped singing in the choir. Jalen's mum kept setting his plate at dinner. Just in case. The seasons changed, the world didn't. By 2006, their story had turned into something quieter. A cautionary tale whispered between mothers on porches, a ghost hanging in the halls of Alabama State University. Their faces faded from posters, but not from memory. Imani didn't forget. Every October, she lit 5 candles at the overlook where the boys had hoped to visit. She sat alone some nights, whispering their names into the wind, and the wind whispered nothing back. Because in Montgomery, 5 black boys missing was never an emergency. It was a footnote, a rumor, an inconvenience. Until one day, 8 years later, the trees themselves would give up the secret they'd been keeping. 8 years later, on a morning brushed with dew and silence, a team of reforestation workers moved through the dense woods of the Talladega National Forest. They were contracted by the state to clear sections of underbrush and deadfall. Nothing unusual, nothing newsworthy. But deep into the slope of a hidden ridge, half swallowed by the earth and vines, one of them paused. What he thought was just a sheet of rusted tin caught the light differently. It had angles, curves, a contour too smooth to be natural. As he kicked aside the moss, the shape emerged more clearly. A bumper, a shattered taillight, a metal emblem still clinging to the back. Honda. No one spoke right away. The vehicle was buried under years of leaves, dirt, and silence. One door handle was warped with rust, the tires deflated and cracked like dried skin. The forest had tried to digest it, but now it was exposed, like a secret too heavy for the trees to hold any longer. When they called the local sheriff's office, no one expected what came next. A dispatcher ran the license plate. The line went quiet. Seconds later, her voice returned. Lower, slower, stunned. That plate belongs to a missing person case, 5 of them, from 2005. Within hours, the woods became a crime scene. Police tape fluttered in the breeze. Forensics vans parked awkwardly along the gravel path, their tires crunching old pine cones as investigators marched toward the buried car, like soldiers returning to a battlefield. Reporters caught wind. Helicopters hovered. Drones zipped above the canopy. The name Elijah Moore trended on Twitter for the first time ever. But for the families, it wasn't closure. It was dread, because finding the car wasn't finding the boys. And whatever the forest had kept hidden for nearly a decade, it wasn't going to give it up without pain. When investigators pried open the vehicle, they found no blood, no bodies, no visible signs of a struggle. But what was there spoke louder. On the floor beneath the driver's seat, a white Converse sneaker, size 10, Malik's favorite. In the back seat, a caricature drawing of Elijah holding blueprints, water-stained and warped, but unmistakable. Next to it, a half-crushed bag of Sour Patch Kids, still sealed. In the trunk, a denim jacket with a faded patch that read ASU Class of '07. It had belonged to Dr. Tyrese's laptop bag, was wedged under the front passenger seat, still zipped. Inside, soaked from years of humidity, were 2 spiral notebooks with coding notes and a small pill bottle labeled omeprazole for his gastritis. Jalen's watch, a silver fossil, was stuck on 12:41. No one could say whether that was morning or afternoon. The most haunting discovery, though, was the disposable camera. 8 years under the elements had warped the plastic, but the film was intact. Technicians at the state lab held their breath as they developed the photos. Some were ruined beyond recognition, but 3 frames survived. The first showed the boys at Mama Lou's, arms around each other, smiling so wide it ached to look at. The second, them sitting in a booth at the Hollow, red Solo cups in hand, laughter frozen in time. And then the third, not in a restaurant, not in the bar, but in the forest, at night. A fire burned in the middle of the frame, casting shadows on dirt and bark. Around it, 9 figures. 5 were easily recognizable: Elijah, Dre, Jalen, Malik, and Tyrese. They sat together, still dressed in their clothes from that night. Their expressions were unreadable. Were they afraid? Calm? The light and motion made it difficult to tell. But it was the others, the ones standing behind the boys, that chilled the technicians. 4 men, 2 with blurred faces, one wearing a baseball cap pulled low, the other bare-chested with what appeared to be a Confederate flag tattoo stretching across his stomach. Another wore a hunting vest. No one was smiling. The flash had caught them mid-movement, half-turned toward the camera, as if surprised it had gone off. The firelight made their eyes look like embers. Analysts enhanced the photo, adjusting contrast, exposure, sharpening details pixel by pixel. But even after hours of enhancement, they couldn't identify the men, not yet. But the photo itself told a story. The boys had made it to Hollow Ridge. And they had met someone there. Someone who never intended to let them leave. The families were called in that same night. They were shown the pictures in private. There were no screams, no outbursts, just silence. One mother covered her mouth. Another simply whispered, "I knew it." They had always known that their sons didn't run, that they didn't vanish, that something, someone, had taken them. The forest had buried the car, but the truth had clawed its way out. What happened after that fire? Where did the boys go? Why was the car left untouched for so long? Hidden so deliberately, so precisely, under trees that seemed to lean in as if helping cover the crime? One forensic technician said it best. That car didn't crash, it was parked. The press dubbed it the Forest Reunion. Social media renamed it the Forgotten Five. But for the families, there were still too many questions, too many years stolen, and too much truth still buried. The photograph was evidence, but it was also a promise that the forest had more to say, and that it wasn't finished speaking yet. The camera flash had illuminated a moment frozen in the woods, but it also cracked open a vault of questions that no one could close again. That single photo, 5 young black men huddled near a fire, surrounded by 4 unidentified men, became the centerpiece of a reopened investigation, a spark reigniting a case that had long gone cold. And as state investigators poured back into the forest, accompanied by FBI agents and cadaver dogs, the Talladega trees, silent for 8 years, began to whisper. The search radius expanded rapidly, covering a 3-mile perimeter around the site where the car had been found. Drones hovered low over the canopy, mapping terrain. Metal detectors swept the underbrush. The soil was combed inch by inch. Then came the second discovery, a barely visible path, almost unnatural in how carefully it was hidden. Overgrown with vines and shaded by thick pines, the narrow trail veered sharply uphill from the car's location. It wasn't listed on any ranger maps. It didn't connect to any known hiking route. Yet tire grooves were faintly imprinted in the earth, nearly erased by time. It led to a clearing, flat, quiet, and unremarkable at first glance, until they found the ash. Beneath a thin layer of leaves and decay lay the unmistakable remains of long-extinguished campfires. Charcoal, burnt wood, a circle of stones arranged by human hands. Around it, investigators found discarded food wrappers, rusted tin cans, fragments of glass bottles. Someone had been here, often, and for more than one night. The location matched the background of the third photo perfectly. A twisted pine in the corner, a low boulder with a jagged split, a distinct pattern in the dirt from years of rain-carving shallow trenches. This was the place. Then came the whisper that turned into a voice. An elderly couple named Tom and Lorraine Hughes lived on a ranch 3 miles west of the clearing. They had been in those woods for over 40 years and remembered the night of October 15th, 2005. Lorraine told investigators, "It was late, past midnight. We heard laughter, young voices, didn't think much of it, figured it was hunters or campers." But then she paused. "What I remember most is that it stopped too fast, like someone turned a switch, and after that it was just quiet, a heavy kind of quiet. Her husband added something else. Over the following weeks, they noticed unfamiliar trucks driving up the old service road late at night, vehicles with no plates or with covers on them. They didn't belong to locals, Tom said. Folks out here know each other's rigs. These were outsiders, and they didn't wave, didn't nod, just passed through like ghosts. The locals had dismissed it then. People came and went. But now, the memories resurfaced like bones in thawed earth. Investigators followed the path from the clearing deeper into the woods, using thermal imaging to detect underground inconsistencies. That's when they stumbled upon the cave. Hidden behind a rock formation and thick undergrowth, the entrance was barely large enough for a grown man to crawl through. Inside, it widened into a low, damp chamber, stale with air that hadn't moved in years. Flashlights scanned the walls. That's when they saw the marks. Scratched into the stone, shallow and desperate, were names: Malik, Jalen, Tyrese, Dre, Elijah. Each carved at different depths, different angles, and then more words. Still here. They lied. It's been days. Rob is sick. No help. Can't leave. Don't trust them. Each message cut into rock like a prayer or a confession. Near the back of the cave, investigators found the remnants of a makeshift camp. 2 sleeping bags nearly disintegrated, mold-covered water bottles, empty cans of beans, a child's flashlight long dead, and an old notebook wrapped in a crumbling plastic bag. Its pages were fragile, but on some, ink remained. It was Elijah's handwriting. The entries were dated October 17th, 18th, 23rd, November 2nd. They told a story no one wanted to believe. The boys had been lured to the overlook. A man offered to show them a better view. Said it was safer, more private, less crowded. They followed. The road turned to gravel, then to dirt, then to a dead end where other men were already waiting. The first entry was confused, almost light-hearted. They said to chill, that it's just for a little while. We laughed it off, but Dre looks worried. But the tone changed quickly. Jalen hurt his leg, tried to leave. They stopped him. No phones. They took our bags. We ask questions. They say we talk too much. Then, Malik says they're stalling. I think he's right. And finally, Tyrese threw up again. It's cold at night. We can't sleep. They say someone's coming, but no one comes. And later? They don't use names. They call us boys. One of them said, "Nobody's coming for you, not where you're from." The entries ended abruptly on December 3rd, 2005. The last line read, "I dreamed of Mama last night. Her voice was soft. I didn't want to wake up." The notebook was a time capsule of horror, a documentation of hope unraveling into fear. Experts confirmed the writings were real, matching Elijah's schoolwork samples. The FBI officially reclassified the case as a racially motivated abduction and wrongful death. The media storm reignited. The old excuses, maybe they ran away, maybe they were involved in something, dissolved under the weight of carved stone and dying ink. But the forest wasn't done. Investigators, emboldened by the discoveries, launched an expanded ground search with cadaver dogs and sonar equipment. A week later, 1.2 kilometers south of the cave, they found a series of shallow depressions beneath a thick grove of cedar. The soil had been turned long ago. The air, even in daylight, felt wrong. The trees, it seemed, had been waiting to speak, and now they were ready to tell everything. The cedar grove was quiet when they found it. Too quiet, investigators would later say, as though even the birds knew to stay away. Beneath the dense canopy, 5 shallow depressions lay camouflaged in the earth, softened by years of fallen needles and forgotten time. But to the trained eyes of forensic specialists, the unnatural alignment was unmistakable. This was no accident of nature. This was human. This was intentional. One by one, they began the excavation, carefully, gently, with brushes instead of shovels, with reverence instead of speed, because everyone present knew what they were about to disturb wasn't just earth. It was truth. It was silence made flesh. The first body they uncovered was wrapped in an old camping tarp. The fabric had partially decomposed, but within it were fragments of clothing, a flannel shirt, denim jeans, a silver watch fused to the bone. Jalen, The watch still read 12:41, a match to the one found in the car. A forensic dentist later confirmed the identity through dental records. Cause of death: untreated infection, likely from a leg wound. Complications consistent with what Elijah had written in his journal. The second grave held Malik. His body was positioned as though curled in on itself, arms folded tightly across his chest, his college hoodie still clinging to his ribs. In his pocket, they found a wallet with his student ID, faded but legible. There was no trauma, no defensive wounds, just signs of malnourishment, dehydration, exposure. He had simply faded. Then Tyrese. His remains were the smallest. His laptop bag was buried beside him, still zipped. Inside, waterlogged notebooks, pens, and a damp strip of photo booth pictures showing the 5 of them making silly faces, all crammed into a tight frame. It was dated August 2005, 2 months before it all happened. Tyrese's bones showed signs of pneumonia, fluid in the lungs, inflammation in the ribs. He had been sick. He had died cold. Alone. Dre came next. His grave was marked only by a cluster of small stones, neatly arranged, as if someone had tried to honor him. The forensic team found graphite pencils still tucked behind his belt, discolored sketch paper in his jacket pocket. One drawing remained intact enough to recognize: Elijah's face, smiling. His ribs showed no signs of violence. His stomach was empty. And finally, Elijah. The boy whose birthday had begun it all. His grave was the furthest from the rest, tucked beneath a leaning cedar with roots that curled like fingers around the earth. His body was thin, frail. In his hand, somehow still clutched between bone and soil, was a broken pen. The same brand he'd used in his journals. His mother identified the necklace he'd worn, the one with a charm that said, "I'm coming home." When the news broke, it swallowed the city whole. There were no more questions of whether they ran away, no more whispers about hidden trouble or secret pasts. There were just 5 boys buried in the woods, abandoned by those who should have protected them, remembered only because the trees refused to keep their secret any longer. Funerals were held, 5 of them, together. A joint ceremony at the cathedral in Montgomery. Hundreds attended, family, students, strangers, activists, journalists. Imani stood at the podium, her voice clear, her hands trembling. "They were never lost," she said. "They were hidden, and we weren't supposed to look for them." But not everyone wept, because for some, the discovery meant danger, questions, accountability. The photo from the camera of the fire and the men was now national evidence. The FBI used facial reconstruction software, reverse light enhancement, and cross-referenced mugshots from old cases. And finally, they found him. The man with the Confederate tattoo. His name, Warren Buck Maddox. A former member of a known extremist militia group that had once patrolled the Talladega region in the early 2000s under the guise of forest protection. A man with priors, assault, intimidation, illegal firearms, but never convicted. He had disappeared from public view around 2006. The connection was chilling. Maddox had operated in the exact area the boys vanished. He had motive, he had ideology, he had access. A warrant was issued. A raid was launched on a property outside Sylacauga, where Maddox was rumored to be living under an alias. They found him in a trailer, heavily armed. It took 5 agents to bring him down. Inside his home, they found relics, newspapers about the missing boys, maps of the forest with trails marked in red, and a folder labeled "Stay Hidden." But Maddox didn't act alone. That much was clear from the photo. There were at least 3 others. One was later identified as Hank Ellis, another ex-militia member. The others remained unknown, protected by time and by a culture of silence. During questioning, Maddox didn't show remorse. He smirked. "They were in the wrong place at the wrong time," he said. "We didn't mean to keep them, but once they saw us, once they knew our names, what were we supposed to do?" His voice was calm, controlled, like it had been rehearsed 1,000 times in his mind. "Nobody looked for them anyway," he added. "Nobody really cared. That sentence echoed across every news channel in the country. It wasn't just an indictment of Maddox. It was a reflection of the system that let him believe it. For the families, the arrests were something, not justice. Justice would have been never needing to bury their sons at all, but something. They held each other tightly, repeating names like prayers: Malik, Jalen, Tyrese, Dre, Elijah. The city painted murals. The university created scholarships. A tree was planted at each grave, but nothing could change the fact that 5 black boys had vanished, and for 8 years almost no one had asked why, until now. And the forest, once complicit in silence, had finally remembered how to speak. The trial of Warren Maddox began under a sky heavy with clouds, as if the weight of the truth that was about to unfold had stretched into the heavens themselves. The courtroom in Montgomery overflowed with reporters, families, law students, and community members, most of them black, many of them clutching folded newspaper clippings and small photos of the boys as they once were, smiling, vibrant, alive. The federal prosecutors laid out the charges: unlawful imprisonment, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and 5 counts of negligent homicide. Not murder, not because the deaths weren't real or tragic or preventable, but because the legal system, bound by technicalities and decayed evidence, could only go so far when time and silence had worked so well in the criminal's favor. Maddox sat stone-faced as testimony began. Forensics experts described the condition of the bodies, the starvation, the untreated infections. A handwriting analyst read from Elijah's notebook entries, her voice cracking as she repeated the line, "Rob is sick, no help, they said someone's coming." The courtroom fell silent as photos of the cave were displayed. The carved names, the sleeping bags, the mold-covered cans. The entry that read, "Don't trust them," etched so hard into stone it had left a permanent groove. One by one, the parents took the stand. Malik's father, his hands trembling as he held his son's ID badge. Jalen's mother, who told the jury she still left her porch light on every night for 8 years. Tyrese's older sister, who kept his last voicemail saved on an old flip phone, playing it once a week just to hear him say, "I'll be home in a bit." Elijah's mother simply held up her son's necklace and whispered, "They said he ran away, but he didn't. He waited for us." And Dre's uncle, a soft-spoken carpenter who had built his nephew a sketching desk by hand, stared down the defendant and said, "You didn't just bury him, you erased the lines he was going to draw." Maddox showed no emotion, not during the evidence, not during the testimonies, not when the photograph from the camera was enlarged and projected onto a massive screen for all to see. The boys near the fire, surrounded by shadows. Prosecutors pointed to him in that frame, shirtless, tattoo visible. He didn't deny it. "Yeah," he said, "that's me. So what?" His defense was weak. His lawyer argued diminished intent, lack of direct violence, and mutual misunderstanding. "My client never intended harm," the attorney claimed. "He simply made poor decisions under paranoia and confusion." But the jury saw through it. It took them only 7 hours to return with a verdict, guilty on all counts. Sentencing was scheduled a month later. Maddox received 65 years without parole. Hank Ellis, the second man identified from the photo, was apprehended shortly after and received 40 years after entering a plea deal. The other 2 remained unnamed, hidden behind the curtain of time and silence. But even with the verdict, something deeper lingered, something more sinister, more entrenched. Because while the men who had held the boys were finally being punished, the institutions that had let it happen were still intact. The Montgomery Police Department quietly released a statement of regret, but no one was fired. No new protocols were announced, no apologies made during daylight hours. One internal memo even referred to the case as a communications lapse. Community leaders demanded more. At a town hall meeting held weeks after the sentencing, Imani stood in front of hundreds, holding Elijah's last journal page. "We didn't lose them because they got lost," she said. "We lost them because no one looked. Because 5 black boys go missing, and the world assumes they're trouble, not victims." Her voice carried, trembling with fire. This is not just about those 4 men in the woods. It's about the silence around them. It's about the system that watched 5 families beg for help and said, "Wait and see." Her words went viral. The hashtag, "They were waiting," trended nationally. Activists rallied, students protested, churches held candlelight vigils, while radio hosts read journal excerpts live on air. Still, the change came slowly, but it came. A year later, Alabama passed the Moore Protocol, named after Elijah, requiring police departments to treat all missing adult cases under 25 as critical within the first 12 hours, regardless of race or gender. Federal lawmakers cited the case in hearings about systemic bias in missing persons investigations. A bill nicknamed the Five Boys Act was introduced to create a national alert system for minority disappearances. It stalled, but its name stayed in the news. The university built a memorial on campus, a semicircle of benches under a canopy of young cedar trees, one for each boy. At the center, a bronze plaque reads, "They left with dreams. They vanished with silence. They returned as a reminder." But for the families, memorials are cold. They visit the grove where their sons were found, not for closure, but because it's the only place where the wind still says their names. Elijah's mother walks between the graves, whispering stories he never got to hear. Dre's uncle sometimes sits on a rock nearby, sketching with the pencils he still carries. And Jalen's mother leaves a slice of birthday cake each year, setting it gently on the stone that marks his name. "Just in case," she says. The forest that once kept their secret now bears their memory. It echoes not with guilt, but with warning. Because what happened to those 5 boys was not just a tragedy. It was a pattern, one that stretched across counties and states, across decades, across skin and silence. And though justice came, it came late. It came after they'd already waited too long, after they'd cried in caves and written their names into stone, after they died not in violence, but in neglect, not at the hands of monsters, but in the grip of men too cowardly to kill, yet too cruel to release. And in the end, the question remains, heavy as clay. How many more are still out there, waiting, hidden, forgotten, because no one looked in time? Long after the verdicts were read and the headlines faded into digital archives, the echoes of what happened to Malik, Jalen, Tyrese, Dre, and Elijah continued to ripple beneath the surface of America's collective conscience. Their story had become more than just a case file or a local tragedy. It had grown into a symbol, a scar, and a mirror held up to a country that still struggled to answer a simple question. Who do we fight for when they disappear? In the months following Maddox's sentencing, a strange pattern began to emerge. Inspired by the newfound attention, families from across the South began coming forward with stories, cases eerily similar, equally dismissed, all involving young black men who had gone missing under circumstances too vague, too unexplored, and too easily forgotten. There was Marcus Green, 19, from rural Mississippi, who vanished after telling his mother he was headed to a friend's house. No formal search was conducted for 48 hours. Then came the story of twins Isaiah and Isaac Bell, 17, last seen walking home from football practice in a Georgia suburb. Police initially claimed they had likely run away. Their bags and shoes were later found in a drainage ditch. Nothing else. A mother in Tennessee mailed a letter to the foundation started in Elijah's name, the 5 Lives Initiative, saying her son Elijah Foster, 21, hadn't been seen since attending a community college party 2 towns over. His case had been marked inactive 3 weeks after he vanished. Each letter, each call, each plea formed a mosaic of neglect, a network of silence that had never been stitched together until now. Imani and the surviving families began connecting these cases, documenting them, sharing them, refusing to let them vanish into data points and dusty filing cabinets. The truth was hard to ignore. Black Americans made up a disproportionate number of missing persons nationwide, yet their stories were consistently underreported, underinvestigated, and underacknowledged. The system hadn't failed once, it had failed routinely. And Malik's mother, who once stood quietly in the back of vigils, stepped forward with a fire that surprised even herself. She travelled with Imani to D.C., where they stood on the steps of Capitol Hill and demanded to be heard. "Don't give us another apology," she said, her voice trembling but unflinching. "Give us a protocol, give us urgency, give us what our sons didn't get." That footage aired on every major network for a week. Then it disappeared like so many others had. But what didn't fade was the pressure. The 5 Lives Initiative expanded, partnering with civil rights lawyers, data scientists, and former investigators who had once been silenced themselves. They built a digital platform mapping missing cases of people of color across the country, overlaying heat maps with socioeconomic data, police response times, and media coverage patterns. What it revealed was staggering, not just where people disappeared, but where justice never started. Meanwhile, the final 2 men seen in the photograph, the ones who had stood beside Maddox near the fire that night, remained unidentified. The FBI, despite facial enhancement and behavioral analysis, hit a wall. The remaining individuals had covered their tracks well, using aliases, abandoning addresses, and leaning into rural networks where silence was currency and suspicion was met with loaded shotguns. But silence isn't perfect. Somewhere near the Alabama-Georgia border, a retired forest ranger anonymously sent in a tip. He'd seen a man matching one of the unknown profiles in a remote logging town a few years back. A loner, worked odd jobs, never gave a last name. Always wore gloves, even in summer. The man had a peculiar tattoo on his forearm, an eagle clutching arrows, surrounded by barbed wire. It wasn't much, but it was something. The FBI reopened the rural lead and deployed a specialized team trained in backwoods surveillance. Weeks passed. Then came the moment. A drone, flying low over a ridge behind an abandoned sawmill, captured footage of a man emerging from a shed. He fit the profile, his gait, his build, even the gloves. When they moved in, he didn't resist. Inside the shed, they found weapons, survival gear, and newspaper clippings of the original case. On the wall, tacked above an old mattress, was the photograph, the one from the disposable camera, torn at the edge but still intact. His name was Travis Whitaker, a former paramilitary survivalist who had once served time for illegal weapons possession but disappeared after his release. During interrogation, he broke. Not emotionally, not out of guilt, but from the weight of years spent hiding. He admitted to being there the night the 5 boys were detained, said he didn't plan it, didn't want to be involved, but once Buck gave the order, it was already too far gone. When asked why they didn't just let them go, his reply was bone-deep chilling. Because they saw us, and because nobody would have believed them, but they'd believe us. White boys with guns, that's protection. Black kids with questions, that's a problem. He gave up the last man's name. Samuel Rourke, a militia recruiter with a history of inciting racial violence in hidden online forums. They found Rourke 2 states away, living under a false identity, running a doomsday supply store. His arrest marked the final chapter in the manhunt. The 4 men from the fire were now all behind bars, yet no one celebrated. Because the real villain wasn't just those men. It was the ease with which they operated, the vacuum of care that let them, the world that turned its eyes elsewhere, and the dozens, perhaps hundreds, of families still waiting for the woods to speak. Imani stood once more at Hollow Ridge, the same overlook the boys never reached. The wind pulled at her jacket as she looked out over the treetops, now lit by sunset. "We found them," she whispered, almost as if to the trees themselves. But how many are still out there, waiting for someone to come looking? Behind her, the cedars swayed gently, as if answering, as if promising they had more stories to tell. By the time the last of the 4 men was locked away, a quiet shift had begun beneath the surface of the country, a reckoning not loud or immediate, but relentless in its persistence. In classrooms, students debated not only the morality of justice delayed, but the machinery of systems built to forget. In churches, prayers were lifted not just for the boys who were found, but for the ones whose names still hung like questions in the air. And across small towns once shrouded in silence, murals bloomed on brick walls, 5 silhouettes beneath tall trees, a trail of stars leading upward, and beneath each mural the words, "They waited, we listened." But the families knew better than to believe in closure. Malik's mother kept a journal now, just like Elijah once did, pages filled with letters to her son, written as though he was still out there, waiting just beyond her reach. "I saw a boy today in the grocery store," one entry read. "He had your laugh. It stopped me cold." Jalen's younger cousin started a podcast called Vanished and Ignored, featuring interviews with families of the missing. It wasn't polished, not yet, but it was honest. And it gave voice to grief that had long been taught to stay quiet. Dre's uncle returned to painting. His first piece showed 5 boys at the edge of a forest, their backs turned, faces tilted toward a warm light spilling through the trees. He titled it Threshold. The painting was displayed at the Montgomery Museum for 6 months. It was later stolen. No one knew by whom. But a copy of it appeared on the wall of a youth center in Louisiana, unsigned, framed in glass. Tyrese's sister, a law student now, began writing her thesis on the racial discrepancy in media response to missing person cases. Her research revealed what the families already knew in their bones. Cases involving white children received nearly 3 times the coverage. Investigations were launched faster, resources deployed sooner, and even when the outcomes were equally tragic, the headlines told a different story. "The truth," she wrote, "is that we have never searched equally, not in the woods, not in the streets, not in our hearts." Meanwhile, the 5 Lives Initiative received an envelope. No return address. Inside, a map, hand-drawn, detailed. It showed another part of the Talladega forest, remote, unmarked on public trails. At the bottom, scrawled in shaky pencil, a message. "Check where the fire never reached." It was a cryptic clue, almost too vague to act on, but they had learned long ago that anything could be a thread. Imani handed the map over to the FBI. A task force was quietly deployed. What they found was another cave, this one deeper, darker. It bore no signs of recent human activity, but it wasn't empty. There were bones, not of the 5 boys, but older remains. At least 2 bodies, female, possibly missing from the late 90s. Nearby, etched into the cave wall in what looked like soot, the initials RJ and MS. Their identities remain unconfirmed, but the message was clear: the forest had more to say. As media attention flared again, conspiracy theories also took root. Online forums speculated about militia networks still operating in secret. One post claimed the forest itself was a burial ground for victims that the system wanted forgotten. Others accused law enforcement of hiding evidence to protect old alliances. A viral video suggested that more caves existed beneath the mountain, used as holding sites during the early 2000s. Most claims were unfounded, but in a country where trust had already eroded, every shadow cast another doubt. Still, beneath the noise, something more honest began to grow: a community. A digital quilt of families, strangers, and advocates who now refused to let stories die in silence. They created an online memorial called The Forest Speaks, where anyone could upload a photo of a missing loved one. Each profile was linked to community-led search tips, legal aid contacts, and even AI-generated age progression tools. And when the site reached its 1,000th entry, a quiet bell rang on every page, 5 soft tones, one for each boy. Back in Montgomery, a school was renamed Elijah Moore Preparatory Academy for Leadership and Justice. Its inaugural class of students, all from underserved communities, walked past a hallway mural every day. It showed the 5 boys standing side by side, shoulders touching, faces clear and determined. The plaque beneath it read, "When they were taken, we became responsible." On orientation day, a teacher asked her students if they knew who the boys were. One little girl raised her hand and said, "They were the ones who didn't stop fighting even after they were gone." The room went quiet. And somewhere, far away in that grove of whispering cedars, the wind moved again. Not everyone understood why the story mattered. Some called it overblown, a fluke, a tragedy, unworthy of rewriting policy or reshaping perception. But the ones who knew, who had waited, who had mourned, who had walked into police stations only to be told, "Come back in 72 hours," they knew this wasn't about 5 boys anymore. It was about the lie we all tell ourselves, that the world is just, that the system works, that if someone vanishes and no one looks, it must mean they were never meant to be found. Imani, standing once more at the base of the trees, didn't believe in ghosts, but she believed in memory, in consequence, in names that echo even when no one speaks them. As she closed her eyes and listened to the branches sway, she thought of Elijah and the words he once wrote inside a cave carved from fear. "We're still here, we just can't shout loud enough." But now the world was shouting for them. And the cedars, those ancient sentinels who had borne witness in silence, had finally learned how to whisper the names back, one by one, over and over, until someone answered. By the fall of the following year, a strange stillness had settled over Hollow Ridge, not a silence of ignorance, but of reverence, as if the forest itself had begun to grieve properly. Leaves drifted like whispers over the ground where 5 boys had once passed without a trace. Yet beneath the roots and beneath the surface of public memory, the ground was still shifting. In a private lab in Birmingham, a team of forensic anthropologists worked under flickering halogen lights to examine the newly discovered bones found in the second cave. The process was delicate, exhaustive. The remains, decades old, were fragile. Time had rendered them brittle, but not mute. Using micro-CT scans and isotope analysis, the team uncovered something unexpected, evidence of binding on the wrist bones. Not accidental, not post-mortem, but deliberate. There were signs of malnutrition, trauma to the ribs, and, in both skeletons, traces of healed fractures from long before death. One of the scientists whispered, "They were kept alive for a while." A dental match eventually confirmed the identity of one set of remains, Rachel June Martin, a black college student who vanished in 1997 from a town 3 hours north. She had been labeled a likely runaway at the time. Her case had never gone past the local precinct. Her parents had died years earlier, never knowing. The second skeleton was presumed to be Maria Santos, a Latinx woman who went missing in 1999. Her case file had been marked inconclusive. When the confirmation came through, her brother drove 16 hours to view the site. He stood at the cave entrance and cried quietly into the earth, thanking it for giving her back. The revelation reignited media interest, but this time the narrative had changed. No longer was it just the story of 5 black boys. Now it was a mosaic of lost people, those who had been buried by more than dirt, by disinterest, by indifference, by bureaucratic sloth dressed in polite apologies. News anchors began using phrases like systemic erasure and historical burial fields. A prominent senator called for a federal review of all missing persons cases from 1980 to 2010 involving minority victims. But the families were wary. They had seen press cycles bloom and fade like weeds in spring. They needed more than headlines, they needed permanence. The 5 Lives Initiative began working with geospatial analysts and historians to map out similar terrains across the Deep South. Patterns emerged: old militia training zones, abandoned mining tunnels, forgotten hunting camps, each one near clusters of unsolved disappearances. Volunteers, mostly college students and retired civil engineers, began exploring these areas, sometimes with nothing but flashlights and printed maps. In one location in Louisiana, a rusted trailer was found in the woods, padlocked from the outside. Inside, rotted mattresses, scribbles on the wall, a tattered backpack with initials that matched another missing teen. Authorities moved fast. A new task force, Silent Roots, was established under the Department of Justice, tasked with investigating these leads. But many locals pushed back. Rural sheriffs called the efforts intrusive. Old-timers claimed it was just city folk stirring ghosts. And in some counties, the families received threats, anonymous letters, slashed tires, surveillance drones that hovered too long. Still, they pressed forward. One evening, as Imani returned from a town hall in Selma, she found her car windshield smeared with red paint, the word liar scrawled across the hood. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but rage. "They erased our sons," she later said on a podcast. "Now they're angry we're unearthing the rest." The podcast episode went viral. Donations to the Five Lives Initiative tripled overnight. That winter, a documentary crew began following the families, capturing their investigations, their grief, their stubborn hope. The working title, What the Bones Remember. It aired 6 months later and was nominated for a Peabody. In one scene, Malik's mother walks through the woods at dawn, stopping every few feet to leave small tokens, a keychain, a sock, a pressed flower. "For the ones who never got found," she says, her voice barely above a whisper. But the most startling development came not from a discovery in the forest, but from within the digital archives. A volunteer archivist named Zeke, just 23 and fresh out of a state college, uncovered a pattern buried in old 911 call logs, calls placed near Hollow Ridge between 1995 and 2005. Dozens of them, all disconnected within seconds. Most were dismissed as prank calls, but one call from May 2004, weeks before the boys disappeared, was different. A raspy voice whispered, "They still got someone down here," before the line went dead. The call had never been followed up. Zeke traced the number to a defunct landline registered to an abandoned ranger station 5 miles east of the cave. Investigators revisited the building, now collapsing under moss and rot. Beneath the floorboards they found a trapdoor, and under it a crawl space, empty but with clear signs of long-ago human presence, a torn shoe, melted candle stubs, and a carved message, "I tried, I swear I tried." The handwriting matched that of Rachel June Martin. It sent a chill through the team. She had been there, she had tried to escape. No one had come. The discovery shifted something in the case's soul. It was no longer just about documenting injustice, it was about confronting how long the world could ignore someone's whisper for help. Elijah's final words, scribbled in panic inside a cave, now echoed with chilling harmony to Rachel's carvings. Two voices, same silence. As winter faded and the cedars shook off their frost, the families gathered once more in the grove. They didn't speak of justice anymore, not as something achieved, but something pursued, like light on the forest floor. They stood hand in hand, surrounding a circle of stones engraved with names. 5 in the center, 2 newly added, and space for more. Not because they wanted it, but because they knew, deep down, there were others still waiting to be remembered. The bones had spoken, and the living would not forget. The forest doesn't forget, not really. It buries, yes, it covers, obscures, muffles, but the dark between the trees holds memory like bark holds scars. And now those shadows had begun to speak, not with words, but with remnants, with symbols, with pieces of pain stitched into the soil. As spring unfurled across Hollow Ridge and the air filled once more with the scent of pine and thawed earth, the ground continued to give up its truths, slowly, stubbornly, as if resisting its own confession. A trail runner, unaware of the history beneath his feet, stumbled upon a rusted tin box wedged under a deadfall tree not 50 yards from the original campsite. Inside were damp, crumpled papers. Most were unreadable, but one, scrawled in smeared graphite, read simply, "Tell my sister I tried to be brave. J." It was presumed to be from Jalen. Forensic testing confirmed the handwriting. His sister, who now led trauma recovery programs for teens affected by systemic violence, held the note against her chest and wept for hours without sound. Her team laminated the note and framed it, not for a museum, but for her own apartment wall. A quiet altar to a boy who had, indeed, tried to be brave. Elsewhere, the task force combed through more digital footprints. A retired investigative journalist named Henry Wilcox long ignored for his conspiratorial tone, approached the Five Lives Initiative with a hard drive full of archived militia forum posts, many now deleted from the public web. Most were hate-fueled rants and coded recruitment flyers, but one thread stood out, a post from 2004 titled "The Ridge Cleansing." It was written by someone using the handle Buck Justice. In it, he described clearing out trespassers and testing loyalty under pressure. There were no names, no exact locations, but the timeline matched. The language echoed Maddox's known rhetoric. "Sometimes," the post read, "you have to purify the ground so real patriots can stand tall." Chillingly, it ended with a quote, "The dark remembers, so do we." The DOJ confirmed the forum's existence, and though the post alone couldn't be used as conclusive evidence, it sparked new warrants, new interrogations, and a sudden, quiet fear among former militia members who had once believed they'd escaped notice. That fear began to spread. One by one, anonymous tips trickled in. A former trainee admitted he had once seen a boy, barefoot, bloody, being dragged into the woods by Maddox and another man. The trainee had been 16 at the time, too afraid to intervene. "He screamed for his mum," the tipster whispered. "I still hear it at night." His testimony reopened interest in several cold cases tied to militia activity across state lines. The web grew wider, but with it came danger. 2 investigators were followed. One found her tires slashed outside her child's daycare. A whistleblower in Georgia had his house firebombed. He survived, barely. The families, too, received new threats. Handwritten notes slipped under their doors. "Dig too deep and you'll join them." But it was too late for fear, too late for silence. Imani and the leadership at the Five Lives Initiative coordinated with major civil rights groups to host a national summit on missing minority persons. Held in Atlanta, it brought together grieving families, law enforcement reformists, social workers, and lawmakers. It was broadcast live, and in a panel titled "The Forest and the Fire: Lessons from Hollow Ridge," Tyrese's sister stood and addressed the crowd. "They said our brothers were lost, but that was never true. We knew where they were." "They were here," she said, pressing her hand to her chest. What was lost was the will to look. Her voice shook, but it did not break. She ended with the words etched into the memorial at Hollow Ridge. "When the world looks away, we must become the light." But the light was not enough for everyone. In a town not far from the ridge, an old man was found dead in his cabin, a suicide note on his table. He had once been a local deputy in 2004. In the letter, he confessed to helping cover up the original police report. He'd been ordered to change the wording, to remove references to armed men and shouting in the woods. He didn't know what had happened exactly, but he'd always suspected. "I was weak," he wrote, "and I let them disappear, those boys." The note ended with a single word scrawled in shaking ink: "Forgive." It was forwarded to the families. They held no ceremony. They held no grudge. The revelation prompted internal reviews in multiple precincts. Some officers were quietly removed, others were promoted, those who had pushed against the silence. But the scars within the system were harder to treat. Media cycles raged again. Pundits debated whether the story had become too politicized, whether the nation was weaponizing trauma. Yet among the people who mattered, the mothers, the brothers, the kids who still disappeared every week, the story wasn't political, it was personal, a mirror, a warning, a prayer. One evening, Elijah's uncle returned to the cave site with a handheld recorder. He sat on a boulder and hit record. For 5 full minutes, he said nothing. Just let the sounds of the forest wash over the mic. Then he whispered, "If you're still out here, if anyone else is listening, we haven't stopped. We never will." He uploaded the recording to the online archive. It became the most downloaded audio file on the site. Some said you could hear voices in the background. Others called it wind. But those who had ever waited for a loved one to return knew better. The forest wasn't silent. It was just waiting to be heard. As dusk settled again over Hollow Ridge and the cedars cast long shadows across the softened trail. A single candle flickered in a glass jar beside the marker stone. No one had placed it there. No one claimed it. But it burned long into the night, defying wind and time, as if lit by the weight of the story had reached places it was never supposed to. Senate hearings, national curriculums, even Sunday sermons in quiet towns that had once turned their faces from the names carved into the memorial stone at Hollow Ridge. But none of it, not the accolades nor the indictments, changed the fact that the missing had always been more than 5. And as the list of uncovered names grew, first Rachel, then Maria, then others connected by place, time, or the shared burden of not being searched for, the movement swelled beyond mourning into action. The 5 Lives Initiative launched a new database. It wasn't like the cold, clinical systems used by federal agencies. It was personal. Each missing person's profile included photographs, voice recordings if available, family interviews, last known clothing sketches. The site wasn't just for identification, it was for remembrance. The tagline read, "If no one came looking, we'll start now." Within 3 weeks, over 2,000 submissions flooded in, mostly black, brown, indigenous faces that had long disappeared from media consciousness. Some had been missing for decades, some for days. But every name lit up the screen like a promise: you are not forgotten. But with each addition to the map came new whispers. Survivors emerged, slowly, cautiously, like deer approaching a clearing. A woman named Lani, now in her 40s, came forward in Mississippi claiming she had been abducted in 2003, held in a shack near Hollow Ridge for over a week before escaping barefoot into the trees. She had never told anyone, not even her own family, believing no one would care about a poor black girl who'd once run away from a foster home. Her testimony matched disturbing details from the uncovered caves down to the placement of candle stubs and the smell of gasoline-soaked tarps. When asked why she was speaking now, her answer was simple. Because they did. She wasn't alone. A former forest ranger admitted to seeing strange gatherings in the early 2000s, mostly white men, heavily armed, who claimed to be training for homeland defense. He filed a report back then. No one followed up. When asked why he stayed silent, he looked down and said, "Because back then I thought they were the good guys." The pressure mounted. In a press conference held under a thunderous sky, the DOJ announced a full-scale reopening of militia-linked disappearances between 1990 and 2010. They called it Operation Unearthed. But for the families, the name felt clinical, too neat for what had been endured. Imani responded in an op-ed, "We are not excavating bones, we are unburying truths." Meanwhile, Tyrese's sister, now a civil rights attorney, won a class action lawsuit against 3 state agencies for their mishandling of missing person reports involving black children. The settlement wasn't massive, but it mandated reform. Faster timelines, broader media alerts, bias training, community liaisons. The win was symbolic, but it was a wedge in the door. And still the forest watched. One evening, during a community-led hike at Hollow Ridge, a child, no older than 10, wandered from the group. For 7 minutes, he was lost in the undergrowth. Panic rippled, searchers fanned out, but when they found him, he was crouched beside a weathered tree stump, whispering into the bark. When asked what he was doing, he said, "Talking to the boy in the wall." His mother froze. "What boy?" she asked. The child pointed. He said his name was Dre. The story made its way online. Most dismissed it as a child's imagination, but those who had stood in that forest, who had heard wind twist through cedar like breath through teeth, did not scoff. They believed the forest held memory, not malice, that the missing, even in death, watched over their own. The murals spread. Cities now painted the 5 across bridge pillars, schoolyards, even courtroom walls, but always with one detail. 5 figures, yes, but shadows of others behind them, unnamed, unseen, always present, always waiting. In Montgomery, Elijah's mother opened a center for youth advocates and trauma survivors, its name the Listening Place. The foyer held only one item, a case filled with journals, all of them blank. Visitors were invited to write messages, stories, names. By the end of its first year, the pages numbered in the thousands. Not every story ended with justice. Some parents died still waiting, some siblings broke under the strain. The cost was never erased, but neither was the purpose. Because the dark between the trees, once a place where children disappeared, had now become sacred. A living archive of every name spoken too late. As summer set in and fireflies lit the trails once feared, a new plaque was placed beside the original memorial. It read, "They were never truly lost. They were waiting to be remembered." And beneath it, in smaller type, "We still search, we still listen, we are not done." The missing had become a movement, and the movement had become a mirror, reflecting back to a nation every shadow it had ever ignored. The 12th summer after the boys vanished, something remarkable happened, not in the forest, not in a courtroom, not on national news, but in the hearts of those who had carried the silence for too long. Hollow Ridge had transformed. What was once a haunted name, a whispered warning, now became a destination for remembrance, resilience, and resistance. And in the center of that change stood 5 mothers. Older now, their grief weathered into grace, their voices no longer cracking with pain but firm with purpose. They returned to the forest not just as mourners, but as keepers. The original campsite where the boys had pitched their last tent had been preserved as part of a community-run historical site, not marked by fences or plaques alone, but by presence. Every month, volunteers from across the country came to walk the trail, plant flowers, leave letters. Some brought photos of their own missing loved ones. Others brought only questions. But all left with something, an echo, a chill, a sense that this place remembered you too. On June 21st, the longest day of the year, a vigil was held. Hundreds gathered beneath the tall pines as candles were lit, one by one. 5 for the boys, 7 more for the others whose names had been uncovered, and an empty lantern glowing faintly for all those yet to be found. No speeches were made. Just music, a single cello playing an old spiritual. And then silence. Not the silence of ignorance, but of reverence, that kind of quiet that listens back. A young girl, no older than 10, approached the memorial stones and placed a tiny paper crane beside Elijah's name. Her mother whispered, "Why that one?" The child shrugged. He looked kind. No one questioned it. Later that night, as fireflies blinked around the clearing, Malik's brother read from a newly published book, The Hollow Years, A Family's Search for 5 Sons and a Nation's Reckoning. It wasn't a bestseller, but it didn't need to be. It was taught now in universities, community workshops, and police academies, because it asked the hardest question of all: who gets searched for and why? In the final chapter, he wrote, "They weren't martyrs, they were boys, funny, flawed, hopeful boys. They didn't die to prove a point. But maybe we can honor them by proving that their lives mattered, not just in memory, but in how we change, in who we protect next, in how we love the ones who go unseen." The story didn't end with an arrest. There were no mass convictions, no perfect courtroom moment. Some who had orchestrated the disappearances faded quietly into death or obscurity, their names never revealed to the public. But the community knew, the forest knew, and sometimes that was enough. The Listening Place opened its 3rd location in Memphis. The database launched a new feature, AI-based pattern analysis, matching unsolved disappearances with locations known for militia and trafficking activity. The success rate tripled. Lawmakers proposed the Hollow Ridge Act allocating permanent federal funds to investigate cold cases involving people of color. It passed, barely, but it passed. And in the center of it all, the candle kept burning, the one no one claimed. It had become a symbol etched into necklaces, badges, patches, a tiny flame surrounded by roots. Its meaning was simple: some lights never leave. Imani, whose voice had once cracked on courthouse steps, now gave lectures around the world. In one of them, standing before a crowd in Johannesburg, she said, "We did not get our sons back, but we got back something else, the belief that our love can outlast their erasure." that even in the darkest soil something holy can grow. That night, she returned to her hotel room and found an envelope under the door. No name. Just a note. "I was there. I couldn't stop it. But I carried his name every day. I'm ready to speak." The past still spoke, but now the present answered, and the future listened, because Hollow Ridge was no longer just a forest. It was proof that the light, when held together, stays,